you can't pigeonhole everybody in quite neat boxes that we might like to say like, okay, you do this role and you do this role.
That you can't fit everybody into neat boxes and drawers is something that applies to my guest for this episode, Phil Reid from Manchester in the UK as well. His career path ranges from playing in a band, managing a music venue, yes, writing code, and training people. Oh, and he's a fellow of the Software Sustainability Institute as well. Listeners to this program will have heard me banging on about acknowledging all the different roles in research before. Of course, writing research software and looking after it is an essential skill these days, but research involves a lot more people, including technicians and librarians, for instance. And Phil Reid, who works at the eScience Lab at the University of Manchester in the UK, is living proof of that, as you will hear in the following conversation I had with him earlier this year.
So my name is Phil Reid. My current job title is Research Community and Training Manager in the University of Manchester, more specifically in the eScience Lab.
But you have quite a history, don't you, if I may put it that way, because you worked in libraries before. And then before that, I think you worked in a recording studio. We touched on that. I'm quite interested in that. So you had some experience in digital data and digital libraries. You're also a carpentry instructor, and you're a recent SSI fellow. There's quite a lot actually going on in your curriculum, where the stint at the Manchester University is probably the last bit now, isn't it? Or...
Well, it's a bit like early and middle and late, but with a gap in the middle.
Okay.
So I was a graduate of computer science in Manchester before the merger with UMIST. In 2004, I graduated, and I worked there immediately afterwards as an RA, a research associate, in a post that we would probably now call an RSE, but that term wasn't really around in 2004.
No, because it came around in 2012, actually. So an RA, what did you do then?
During that post, I was working in exam software development. Rather than the common offer at the time was a lot of multiple choice questions, the software we were building was looking at free text answers and aiding human markers. Rather than saying the computer does everything, our remit was to say, well, let's cluster the similar answers together, which makes it easier for the human marker to put things together or sort them or rank them, which was really good as well for looking for any cheating that may have happened as well. So I did that role for 3 years or so, and then when the funding expired, I went freelance as a web developer and trainer and the music stuff, which I'll come back to later, hopefully. And then I worked in the library as a data specialist and librarian, teaching and learning librarian for 11 years.
It's that I want to start our conversation in more detail with. When we think about libraries, I know it's changed for a lot of us, but when we think about libraries, many think of us as books and collections of articles, but there's actually quite a lot of software happening these days, isn't there?
Oh, very much. But you introduce yourself as a librarian to people outside of the field, and they tend to ask you about books. And though I didn't touch books really at all in all that time, I was working with databases, very data intensive. And sometimes that's with actual research data or data that's used in research. And sometimes that's with the metadata and the cataloging and so on.
Could you give us a flavor of what that actually entails? So I know that metadata, I can get an idea of that because you have research projects which get published, but is it only the published articles and books that you create metadata about, or is it about any kind of research projects, what goes into a library?
Oh, I'm not quite sure how to start with that question. Yeah, well, what I would call metadata is a very broad collection of different things, really, and it can be anything that's describing and organizing. I would mostly work with financial data sources, accounting and finance data throughout most of that post, and we would collect from the commercial suppliers of databases. There might be, let's say, 30 years of daily data points for 600 companies. And you start to work with quite a big scale quite quickly with that. But what the problem would be where you've got some data would be, for example, on the trading information, and that comes from one source. And then if you're talking about the biographic data about the directors of the company or anything about their fundamentals, about their accounts and so on, these come from different sources. They sometimes can come from the same source, but you end up paying twice for the same information if you do that. That's one problem that we would address by saying, no, we've got different sources. We will work with them together. They don't have common identifiers quite often because they're from competing vendors. And there are efforts to address that.
I'd like to understand it a little bit more. So when you talk about financial data, why would a library collect financial data? What would it do with that? Is it for research purposes, or is it for its own purposes? Is it financial data about the library, or what? Could you create a context about that?
Those terms are kind of overloaded to some extent about business and finance, really. So for my context, in the business school at the University of Manchester, there is 4 divisions, one of which is accounting and finance. So I worked primarily with that division, with the sources that they would buy in, because data is captured by other people. Often it's public information that comes out of annual reports of companies. But the interesting thing there is that somebody else put it all together and organized it. And there are other data sources that come as a result of professional analysts. They forecast what the company performance will be. And that is something that we purchase through the library and provide to researchers to do analysis with, and then ask whatever research questions they're asking.
So it is ultimately for research, and sort of you have different sources where these data are coming from. So this is the financial and the monetary aspect. I guess your library, or the library in Manchester, covers different areas of research as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Although my initial start in the library was with that area, I worked across other subjects and teams as well throughout that time. So I worked on 2 secondments during that post. One was on our digital humanities scoping project in 2016, and the other was part-time as a research associate in the business school. Again, kind of an RSE post, really, but it wasn't called that.
You have some experience in programming from 2004, what you mentioned earlier. But your colleagues or the people who join a library, is that a skill set that is nowadays required to have these kind of IT skills, data management skills, software skills, or is that something that you need to bring people up to speed with?
Definitely need to bring people up to speed, I suppose. So people come into working in a library profession from many different routes. There's the traditional library school, as we call it, which is very valuable. You're learning about cataloguing and so on, and a lot more. But increasingly people are coming into the library profession from other directions. And even if you're not, the landscape of what's required working in libraries is becoming more digital, as it is in most fields. So there's been a lot of work on that. So something I was involved with around 2016 was a support from JISC. They developed, so JISC it's a national organization about information support and services. And they had a digital capability tools skills survey that they piloted in Manchester back then. And the team I was in there were creating a digital skills development resource from people who completed that survey to cover things like information literacy, digital learning, communications, with ICT proficiency at the centre. And that was useful, but that was kind of like baseline office work in some senses. What I found is that increasingly on an actual research field, the skills were more advanced, what was required in terms of programmatic organization of larger data sets, coding, scripting, more basically. And that's what I found was addressed with library carpentry as a collection of training materials and workshops, and a massive international community of volunteers would help to address some of those concerns.
Yeah, I'm glad to bring this up because library carpentries is what I wanted to turn to next. So I think a number of people might have heard of the carpentries in terms of software development, but I think there are different sections of carpentries, aren't there?
That's right. We sometimes would say we have software carpentry, which is primarily about programming and code. So there would be lessons in R and Python and version control. And then there's data carpentry, which is more about working with data sets rather than tools, which has different flavors for social sciences and genomics and other areas. And the third one, not that this was planned in any objective way at the start, what ended up happening is library carpentry, which formally joined the other carpentries, I think, in around 2018, 19.
Okay, it's fairly recent.
Yeah, it's more recent, where software carpentry is 20 years old.
Yeah, indeed.
And there's high-performance computing carpentries coming as well.
So what is different in the library carpentries? What is it that you focus on? Because you're a trainer.
I am a qualified instructor at library carpentry and any carpentries, and I was a member of the International Curriculum Advisory Committee for 4 or 5 years as well. So what we focused on more as, I think our audience was different, is the first thing I would say. So rather than working with researchers, we would talk with library and information professionals a lot more. And it does kind of bleed more into the humanities side of things a bit as well. With Edinburgh, University of Edinburgh, their carpentries programme, they've worked with Scottish government-funded courses. I've taught with them workforce skills projects where they would have a lot of people from the galleries, libraries, archives, museum or GLAM sector, and we could teach library carpentry materials to them sometimes as well.
What kind of teaching lessons, what does the curriculum actually look like then? So is something like Git part of it? Because I guess that Git can be useful for a lot of different things, not just engineering.
Exactly, yeah. So part of that is teaching people the values of version control, why you would have to organize and keep track of not just code, which can be a new concept and is a bit of a paradigm shift for some people. And it can be a hard sell, but we can express the virtues, the values of such working. So that's part of it. And Git and GitHub a little bit as two distinct things, really.
When I look at what we've just talked about, you started off working in IT yourself and then moved more and more into a training role, because I think, as far as I understand what you said earlier, you're currently doing some training strategies. Or did I get this wrong?
Slightly, yeah. And more from a step back, really, in terms of train the trainer kind of area, really, which comes in.
Okay, yeah.
So that is something that I've done in the carpentries and in the library. I was very much involved with our onboarding of our newer staff into the team. So one thing I observed throughout that time was that we would have people joining the team in a specialist library support service, it's called. And in that service, we providing guidance on copyright, on systematic reviews, on referencing, and the business data, which is the team I talked about before. Because people spend fractional times across each of these areas, and they might not have the background from all of those areas that they're working in, I found that it wasn't enough to just say, off you go, just have a look at these resources, come back to me next month, next year.
Yeah.
It doesn't retain because you don't have that opportunity to really reinforce and build on. So what I did, following some reflective practice that came about during my PG certificate in higher education course that I was completing at the time, was to come up with a competency framework for the team. So what that looked like, we had a base level skill expectation of tasks that people could do across different aspects of the team for inquiry support and teaching and building training materials. And then we had additional columns for each of the specialisms. And that was very effective. We brought people in for about 3 years throughout the team. They'd come in, I'd sit with the service area specialist and the new person, and we'd work through and add to their personal development plans, annual reports, and they would come back and see, marking across what they were doing and asking questions. And it was a lot easier for them to have something written down that they could say, okay, this is what I do, this is what I do next.
You've been now doing the trainers and coming up with these competency frameworks. And you mentioned earlier that things are shifting in libraries and data management and library management, which is more IT based and digital these days and touching on digital humanities. Where do you see this shift going? And do you see there's a difference actually between what you're doing, what you're training people up to, and what other roles such as research software engineers do? Is there a difference actually at all, would you say?
There's differences, but I don't think it's always very classified in the same way that you can't pigeonhole everybody in quite neat boxes that we might like to say, like, okay, you do this role and you do this role. Maybe that works on some disciplines more than others. I've seen that in the humanities support that I've been involved with, there's a smaller team, maybe with a more niche interest area. The individuals are doing far more different roles concurrently. So you might have professors doing Python coding or postdocs doing a lot more of that sort of thing. and organizing data sets and collecting data sets rather than buying in data sets or from retrieving things from telescopes or whatever other equipment.
I'm just mentioning this because we had discussions, for instance, at the Alan Turing Institute, and there is something called the Hidden Ref, which is the research excellence framework, and trying to shine a light on the things that usually gets forgotten or not mentioned, and one of which, of course, is software, but the other one is data and data management. And there's been a talk in some corners, I would say, that, research software engineering is very much on the map. Maybe we need to shine a light on things like research data and research data management as well, and librarians and technicians.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talk about different kinds of research outputs, secondary outputs. There's different ways to shine a light on that, to use your words, I think. And some of that involves making fair, findable, accessible, and so on, resources and repositories as well, to find where people could put this stuff, where they can get the credit, and make sure that things are reusable. And there's a lot of efforts going on, as we know. In my team now, in the eScience Lab, we have several products and services that are available, particularly in life sciences, but not exclusively. So we have the RDM kit, which comes from Elixir, Life Sciences Network in Europe.
Yeah.
So that gives a lot of guidance on where people should be starting with research data management, organized by topic and by area. And we have our Fairdom Hub platform, which is a public place for people to deposit standard operating procedures, workflows, and other kinds of research outputs as well, which is very widely used.
It's time to move on to the other subject I want to talk about, which is the Software Sustainability Institute, because you've been crowned a new fellow at the beginning of this year. And I'll be interesting to see how that application and what you plan to do with it ties in with the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I'm very pleased and that I had the opportunity to apply, first of all, to the program. I started my current post about a year ago, or a year and a half ago. What that meant was that I had a more of a research focus and more of a software focus again, like I used to have in my previous posts. So what that looks like now is building on what I've been doing with teaching and with competencies and so on. I discovered the RSE competency framework, as it was called, which was born from the RSE Con, several years of conferences where they collected skills that were necessary for people working as RSEs or related posts to say, okay, this is what I'm doing. I don't know how to progress in my career. There's courses available, but they might not really be adjusted or suitable. So management courses might talk about focusing on assuming that people have full-time posts on one project, one team, and they talk to the same people every day, do the same thing every day. Very much not the case with a lot of RSE teams who are spread across lots of projects concurrently, or you don't know where you're going to be deployed. It's not that binary, but there is a feel, I think, towards that. And then also what skills are necessary in an emerging field, in a changing field, what particular skills you need is difficult to define. So there's a lot of effort from across the community in the UK and wider to build on this framework and the competencies as part of that, and build an additional toolkit on top.
Is that the direct toolkit?
It's now called Direct Framework, yes.
Okay, explain a little bit what that is.
So it stands for Digital Research Competencies Framework. We'll identify the skills and define development pathways and progress people's careers in research software, which I'm very pleased to be focusing on as the subject of my fellowship this year. Part of it is a schema of skills, which has been collected from previous workshops, where there was a surprising focus on the soft skills side of things, time management and organization and so on, communication skills, as well as the technical digital skills that we might expect. And there's a web application that's being built in parallel to this work. It will allow people to self-assess across the skills and recommend training opportunities at different levels mapped to Bloom's taxonomy. And there'll be an interface with team managers as well to look at what skills and gaps they have across the team.
So Bloom's taxonomy, you have to drill that down a little bit because I'm not quite sure that listener. Oh, yes, you do, I'm afraid, Phil.
Okay.
What is that?
Bloom's taxonomy of learning, it's backbone for various different principles about progressing throughout, building on what you've done. And there's a triangle, and it's quite easy to find references online for anyone listening now. It builds up from learning above knowledge to understanding applying and then analyzing what you're doing. So that allows you to synthesize new things and eventually evaluate the content of the subject of what you're learning.
Right. Okay. So that's Bloom's taxonomy. When people talk about frameworks, when you work in the private sector, well, not only when you work in the private sector, so human resources or personnel department, as they used to be called, they usually have something like a framework, a career framework. What is actually a framework and what is it useful for, and how would you apply it in practice? What can you do with it, in other words?
I think the initial part will be for people to reflect and identify what information they know about themselves and what opportunities are available for them in some kind of pathway.
Okay, then what?
And then we provide the examples of what course somebody might take. They could then decide, is this the right one for me? Have conversations with the line managers and peers, for example. And then some of these opportunities, we're going to try and include free resources or open source materials where possible.
So the framework is then kind of a signpost to where you can enhance your own skills in particular areas.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Is that then for carpentries, or is that sort of across the board, or is that then for a university, or how does this work?
It's not limited to any one content provider. So we will find the most appropriate resources we can and include those.
How do you go about in your SSI fellowship with that? So what concrete steps do you hope you will be able to take during your
My
time?
particular take on this work is to broaden the audience, really. So most of the research, the RSEs that have been involved in building the work so far have been from STEM. And I have more knowledge and experience with libraries, with GLAM, and with digital humanities, arts and humanities areas. So because that's not been quite so addressed, I'd like to do knowledge exchange between all communities, really, also and take the toolkit onto the road, as it were, to various conferences and find out where people already are. So whether that is a Digital Humanities Association UK and Ireland network in Glasgow, or whether that's somewhere else, that's something I'm looking forward to. But then applying that to backwards as well into life sciences frameworks. And I've got some conversations I'm having with people from other institutions, with Turing Way and EMBL EBI, where we may take this exchange in both directions.
Okay, Elixir as well.
And with Elixir, yes. Okay, so I've been invited to talk with UK Training Network as well about this work at some point, hopefully.
What made you go into the SSI fellowship in the first place? I mean, you're doing a lot of that stuff you're doing a lot of that work already in your day-to-day work, and you've been a carpenter instructor and all of that. So what do you hope to get out of that for yourself?
I think it's a fantastic network of people, and having that reach of people you can say, oh, could you just answer this? Like, what do you think about this? You know, the conversations that happen in Slack, for example, are very valuable. And then actually meeting people face to face really helps to solidify and develop relationships, which you can do through the SSI as well.
We've come to the end now. So what do you think is in store for you then?
I will complete the fellowship, although they have the saying, once a fellow, always a fellow.
Indeed.
So, which is a fantastic idea. So I'll continue with that. I'm less involved with the carpentries at the moment, though I do have interest in that still, perhaps also from the relationship with Elixir and with our other projects that I work in the East Science Lab. We're talking on eVerse projects and wider network areas too. So I'm waiting to see what comes around the corner with some of that. So for example, the Biohackathon, which I attended in November 2024 as well with Bioschemas work I was doing there, that was really a wonderful way to progress pieces of work that you don't normally make the opportunity to do. So more events like that, really, I think.
Thank you very much for your time, Phil, and enjoy your fellowship.
Thank you. Yes. And if you want to know any more about the music stuff.
Goodness me, we've come to the end. We haven't talked about that at all. Sorry, that I'm very much amiss. And we're going to talk about it right now. So we haven't reached the end.
It's a teaser.
No. So tell me about that, because you've been the manager of a recording studio, haven't you?
Yeah. So with some friends in South Manchester around 20 years ago, we were running music events through an organisation called Extraordinary Rendition. And we needed our own rehearsal space, and we had a collection of different bands that overlapped, and we were putting on events as well as music promoters, and we set up a rehearsal studio as part of that work.
Is that because you played music yourself? You said your friends did that? Was that
Yeah, I
particular?
was in the Irish band and a little bit in several other, in the jazz band and the soul band. I played tin whistle and baron and keyboards and
Oh
flute.
wow! Oh wow! That's quite something.
That
I'm
was
glad we
fun.
touched on that in this session. How was that then? I mean, it's quite a different job, isn't it? Just
Oh, it's very
managing a
different. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the people you meet, I mean, there's musicians everywhere. We're hiding in plain sight, really. But the way of working in terms of the hours is very different. So you work all
yeah.
day and then be a musician performing until after midnight, getting home. People would rehearse until like 11 p.m. and then we'd have to wrap up in Ancoats. It's not the most pleasant
Mm.
experience, really, in old mills and so on. But it's really that kind of freedom and that opportunity to say, be your own boss and sort of have that different attitude. I'm very glad I was doing that for a while, but I did come back to salary ultimately. Salary's nice too.
Yes, it helps, doesn't it? Are you missing that then, working in a recording studio?
I am still doing music, so we have our library choir. I'm still part of that in
Yeah.
university, and play in an Irish covers band as well from time to time. So I still have that outlet, which is really
Yeah,
good.
and listeners can't see that obviously, but I can see and peek over your shoulders and see a piano, which seems to
There
me an
is a
electric
piano in
one.
this room. Yes, it's true.
There is a piano in this room.
And a
You know,
cajon I use as the piano stool, the drum.
okay. So, how long did you do that for, and when? What time period?
So the music stuff was around 2005 to 2009,
Right. Okay.
roughly.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I've been doing music since I was 7 years old.
Okay.
So my first performance was with school music, but then my first band stuff was when I was 17.
Oh, well, very impressive. Well, thanks very much for talking to me about this. This is great. Maybe you get back to recording studios. If not as a manager, then perhaps as a musician.
Yeah, it's never that far away, is it? There's always some
So, exactly.
opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show.
If you're interested in the work around digital skills and digital skills frameworks, you'll find a few links in the show notes. There's been quite a lot of talk about this at this year's Research Software Engineering Conference at the University of Warwick, and no doubt the subject will come up in one form or another in episodes to come. And if you're interested also in becoming a Fellow of the Software Sustainability Institute in the UK, well, applications for next year's fellowship program have now closed at the start of October. But don't let this stop you from applying next year. You can go to the website and find out more about this opportunity. Next week's episode will take us to Hamburg in Germany. To be precise, to the annual International Supercomputing Conference ISC that happened, as it always seems to do, during June earlier this year. Last year they had their very first RSE workshop there, and a year on, the second round of RSE workshop was running with a focus on an interesting subject, that of continuous deployment and development for high-performance computers, and you'll be meeting the organizers and some of the speakers. And I hope to see you next week. Oh, time's up. See you next time. But before I forget, this podcast is covered by the Creative Commons license. See ya.